Harley transmissions, 4-speed versus 5-speed. More gears, more power, right? Wrong. There are so many misconceptions about the differences between Harley transmissions, and depending on your specific plans for your next build, choosing the wrong one could turn into a total catastrophe. If you want to know how to choose the proper transmission for your build, you've come to the right place. I'm Grease, you're watching Grease's Garage, and I'm going to help you skip the shrug. So let's jump right into today's topic. We're going to start with the 4-speed and just go over some of the players in the game here that are competing for real estate on your bike. First up for the 4-speed, we have the oldest model, which is the jockey lid. If you've ever seen a knucklehead, that's what came on the knucklehead. This is a positional transmission. What I mean by that is that unlike modern bikes where you either go up or down to shift your gears up or down, you actually had to click that shifter into all the various positions, and that's how you shifted gears. This is a very old, very rare transmission, very expensive, and to be quite honest, it's very unlikely that you're going to be running one of these unless you're on a knucklehead. So if that's not you, you can pretty much cross this off your list. Getting into the more commonly seen transmissions now, next up we've got the ratchet top. Now this is the preferred transmission of the real white knuckler knife carrying, Bob Seger night moves playing, high mid peg having, real deal chopper guys. They love this transmission. It is floating around everywhere. Most of the time, people who are interested in jockey shift tend to favor the ratchet top, but don't jump right to that conclusion yet. We'll talk more about that later. But while this transmission is less expensive than the jockey lid, it's still pretty expensive compared to the next option, which we're going to talk about now. Last up in our 4-speed list, we have the rotary top. This is the official transmission of people who pretend that they wouldn't rather have a ratchet top. Now, this is the transmission that I have on my bike. I love this transmission, and I know I make that joke about it not being a ratchet top, but quite honestly, in my opinion, there is no functional difference between the rotary top and the ratchet top. Now, this last part about the rotary top is purely anecdotal. It's just something I've heard from a lot of people, and that is that they tend to prefer the rotary top for jockey shift because it has a shorter throw than the ratchet top. If you're not familiar with the term, throw is just how far you have to push the lever in order to make the gear shift. I have this transmission. I find the throw to be superb and better than the ratchet top, but that's just my opinion, so you could take that with a grain of salt. Now, the final transmission in our list today, hoping to take up that space under your oil tank, is the Evo 5-speed transmission. This was launched in 1985, came on the Evo motors. It is the same transmission that came on my Evo Big Twin. Now, of the transmissions we've talked about today, this is obviously the most modern. It is less prone to leaking and has some design improvements over the others, but depending on your plans, those design improvements might actually be a massive headache. Now that you're familiar with all the transmissions we're going to be comparing today, let's talk about the two major factors that are going to be the decision maker as to which transmission is right for your build. The first factor in making this decision is the kickstart. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Yes, of course, if I wanted a Kickstarter, I'd buy the transmission that comes with a Kickstarter. However, as I mentioned earlier in the video, there are some performance advantages of the 5-speed transmission. So I don't necessarily advise everyone who wants a kicker on their bike to automatically buy a 4-speed. Here's where I draw the line. If you plan to kick your bike occasionally, but you also are going to retain your electric start, so you have both options, and kicking is something you do from time to time, no problem at all if you want to go with the 5-speed and add that aftermarket kicker kit as a backup option. It's actually really nice to have that as a backup option regardless on the 5-speed, just because you never know when a starter is going to go bad on you. At least you've got a way to start the bike. However, if you are going to remove your electric starter and go full chopper, you want to clean that thing up with a ton of negative space, in that instance, I would recommend that you say goodbye to the 5-speed, purchase a factory transmission with a factory kicker, because having owned the 5-speed with the kit and then also owned the factory 4-speed on the same bike, I can tell you the factory kicker is more robust. It's something I trust 100% to start my bike every single time, and I'm certainly gambling on it that way because I have no electric starter. So it is how I start my bike every time. So if it's your only option, go with the 4-speed. If it's something just from time to time, consider the 5-speed. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, and that is that, hey, maybe Grease just bought a terrible kit. And while I don't think the kit I bought was terrible, I bought an Ultima kit. It wasn't an awful product, but it also wasn't a top-notch product. Some of you more savvy chopper guys out there who are familiar with all of the offerings on the market might say, well, what about something like a Cannonball kicker kit on a 5-speed? The Cannonball kit is super, super premium, super high-end, and a ton of people say that it's just as reliable, if not more reliable, than the factory kicker. Only problem with that is the Cannonball kit costs $1,600, which begs the question. If you have $1,600, you could just buy a 4-speed. So the question then becomes 4-speed with a factory kicker or the 5-speed with the Cannonball kicker. Now, how do we make this decision? By getting into our next category. It wouldn't be a Grease's Garage video if we didn't talk about jockey shift in every single video and just about every 5 minutes in the video. So here's that moment. The decision we just described can be made by deciding whether you personally are intending to run a jockey shift on your bike. Here's why. The clutch cable on the 5-speed transmission goes from your handlebars down past your down tubes and very frustratingly over to the right-hand side of the bike and then into a gasket-sealed cover in your transmission. Changing your clutch cable, total pain. Not that you necessarily need to change your clutch cable all the time. However, when it comes to jockey shift, this poses a big problem because your clutch pedal, if you're planning on running a foot clutch, which you would be with a jockey shift, is on the other side of the motorcycle. So this leaves you with two primary options. And now I am qualified to speak on this because prior to swapping for the 4-speed, I did run a 5-speed transmission with the aftermarket kicker kit with a jockey shift and a foot clutch. So I have taken both of these setups to full chopper, all right? So I'm not just speaking hypothetically here. I've done them both. This is the problem. When you route that clutch cable, you have two options. You can either snake it under the motor of the bike and then up toward your foot pedal on the left-hand side, creating a very sharp bend in the cable, or you can do the other option of running it forward past your rear brake pedal, up around your front down tubes, and then back into the clutch pedal. And while that creates a better angle for the clutch cable to actually actuate, it just looks awful. I'm sorry. If you have this on your bike, I'm not intending to be mean to you, but it looks terrible. And I absolutely could not stand the look of it. I immediately changed it, routed it under the bike, and I was able to get it to work. But this poses another problem that if you've never experienced it for yourself, you might not realize, and that's that cable-driven foot clutches suck. You might not want to believe me on this because you're thinking, okay, you just set yours up wrong. It's not the only one I've ridden. My XS650 had one for a little bit. My younger brother's XS650 had one. My Evo, like I just mentioned, had one. They're always janky. It's never quite the smooth pull that you get when you're running something like a solid rod. So why is this better with a 4-speed? The answer is on the 4-speed transmissions, not only is the clutch cable not routed internally into the right-hand side cover, it's actually routed on the external arm that sits on top of the transmission. And by simply adding a little bit of length to that clutch release arm, like you can see here, I made mine using a 1/2-inch stainless rod, just welded it to the original piece, and bada bing, bada boom, you're now sticking out the other side of the bike directly in line with your clutch pedal. All you need is 2 Heim joints, and you can just build this thing rock solid, never have to worry about it again. Actually, if you're interested in building it, click on this video right here where I'll show you how to build the exact same jockey shift setup I'm talking about right now for less than 50 bucks. But getting back to this, those of you who are interested in going jockey shift should get a 4-speed transmission. So if you found yourself in that pickle we talked about earlier, where you're trying to decide between the Cannonball kit and buying a whole separate transmission, let the jockey shift be your guide. So before we move on to one massive misconception that we need to clear up at the end of this video, let's just summarize what we've talked about thus far. You have two options, a 4-speed or a 5-speed. And there are two main factors involved in the decision, whether you're going to do kickstart and whether you're going to do jockey shift. If you're doing jockey shift, automatically get a 4-speed. If you're only interested in kickstarting, you may be well served to go with a high quality kickstart kit and keep your 5-speed with your hand clutch. Nothing wrong with that setup. Or if you're going to retain your electric starter, go with the cheaper setup, keep your hand clutch, enjoy your 5-speed. Now with that all summarized and out of the way, let's get into one giant misconception that I have to talk about in this video because I hear it even more often than the old chestnut of it ran when parked. So let's talk about it. Will the 4-speed struggle on the highway? People say this to me constantly. Oh, a 4-speed, can that thing even go on the highway? Are you ready for me to blow your mind? The 5-speed and the 4-speed in top gear have the exact same ratio, which is a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you have not been told this yet, let me be the one to tell you. The 4-speed and 5-speed do not differ at all with their top gear. So when you're sitting at 80 in a 5-speed or you're sitting at 80 on a 4-speed, the bike is not working any harder on either setup. And I know this not only as a technical matter of reading it in the factory service manual, but also having ridden the same motor with both transmissions. Guys, it's exactly the same. So if that is something that's clouding your judgment on this decision, put that out of your mind. Now, if you are interested in trying jockey shift for the first time, but you're not really sure how it works, I have made the only video on the internet that will teach you how to ride a jockey shift motorcycle. That video is sitting right here. Click on that video, subscribe to Grease's Garage, and I will catch you guys next week.